Hey everyone, hope we're doing well. What we're going to talk about today on Thursday, April 9th, is looking at how we develop socially through childhood. So yesterday we talked about Piaget, right? So Piaget talked about how we develop cognitively through childhood, in terms of how we develop the ability to think and do different cognitive abilities through the stages of cognitive development. Today, we're going to talk about Erik Erikson. So, I'm just going to briefly kind of introduce the basics of his structure because he has 8 stages to his theory. We're not going to cover all 8. And then this will lead into what you're going to do with your Unit 7 summative project. So, I'll introduce that today, and then that's going to be due a week from today. So, you got plenty of time to work on that. Other than that, your reminders, focus notes, it's your last set of focus notes for the whole class, are due 11:59 p.m. Tuesday. Technically, you don't have class on Tuesday, but that's still the due date. So make sure you get those turned in when you have those done. So we'll go ahead and get into it here with Erik Erikson, the man in the bolo tie. That's what this is here, a little bolo tie. So I'm just going to introduce the basics of his theory. We'll talk about 2 stages that are most relevant to you, and then I'll introduce your developmental project. So looking here with Erikson, his theory is going to look at the question of how do we develop socially through adulthood. All right, so one of the criticisms of Piaget was Piaget stopped cognitive development at around the age of 13, which most people don't believe is true. And now Erikson here is actually he's going to go from womb to tomb. So all the way from birth to when you die. And he's going to have 8 stages in terms of how we develop socially and how our environment influences us. And then how that impacts the way we deal with other people. So his theory here is on how our personality develops through experience with others. So interesting here, he could probably fit into the personality unit, but we put him here in developmental because it's a much wider span, and he's talking womb to tomb here. So we put him in developmental psychology. He would be considered a neo-Freudian because he's going to be influenced by Freud and this idea that there's an internal conflict, and that is whether you're successful or you fail, that internal conflict is going to have certain impacts on your personality. So Freud talked about sexual and aggressive urges. Here, Erikson is going to look more at, social tensions. So similar to some of the other neo-Freudians, looking at social tensions and kind of defining yourself in society. So these are the 8 stages that Erikson said we progress through. And the conflict is the needs of the individual versus the needs of society. So just like how Freud had a conflict or crisis at each of his stage of psychosexual development, here with Erikson, there's going to be a crisis or a conflict that the individual has to deal with, and that is going to influence their personality. So you can see here, going all the way to when you're an infant, what you're dealing with as an infant is like, can I trust the world? So that's kind of the crisis, is learning how to trust others. So if you're successful, you learn that the world is reliable. You're surrounded by good people. That develops basic trust. And then obviously if you fail, basic mistrust. Toddler is kind of figuring out if you can do things on your own. So if you're successful with that, you develop autonomy. And then if you fail, shame and doubt. All right, so it goes through all 8 of those, all the way to when you're dead, or not when you're dead, but when you're, getting close to it, you're an older adult. The question is, how do I feel about myself? Ego integrity would be like, I feel like I did a lot with my life. I fulfilled everything, checked off my bucket list, lived with purpose. Like, I feel pretty good. And then despair is kind of looking back on life like, I didn't do anything. So we're going to talk specifically about stage 5, and stage 6, because stage 5 is the one you're currently in, and then stage 6 is going to be one that some of you are moving into here pretty soon, and then others are a little further off, and you're probably just starting to deal with stage 5. So stage 5, we call it identity versus role confusion, because those are kind of the two ways you can go. You can go identity, or you can develop role confusion. So the crisis is resolving the question of who am I? And really defining as an individual who you are and what defines you. So and then also looking at like, what's my role in society? So if you look at the age there, age 13 to 21, you're all in this stage according to Erikson. You're trying to figure out what you're good at, how you want to define yourself, potentially careers you're going to go into, hobbies and interests you have, and those are going to define who you are. So pretty much I put the Breakfast Club up here, right? That whole movie is based off of, resolving the question of who am I, and really any movie or TV show that is set in a high school setting is incorporating this identity versus role confusion crisis at some point. The video I usually show with this is from Mean Girls. The scene where she walks into the cafeteria and they have the map of the cafeteria and they're defining like, oh, this is where the jocks sit, this is where the emo kids sit, so forth. And the idea that probably a lot of what you do in high school is going to define that answer. So success here would be fidelity. You develop fidelity, which is you have high self-esteem and self-confidence because you've developed your own values and identity. So that's where the person you show or the person you kind of display for everyone else is aligned with who you believe you are, your own values and your identity. So once again, going back to the Breakfast Club, like the whole movie is just based off of these 5 students kind of solving this role confusion. The athlete doesn't want to be labeled as an athlete, so he's working through that. The criminal doesn't want to be labeled as a criminal, so he's working through that. And then failure is role confusion. You have low self-esteem and self-confidence because of that uncertainty. So a lot of times role confusion is a result of other people put a label on you, or you surround yourself with people that you don't want to be with, but that label kind of gets put on you. Maybe you let your parents define who you are. So now the next part here is going into stage 6. So the one thing to understand with Erikson here is success or failure, right? If we go back all the way to the 8 stages, success and identity versus role confusion is going to set you up for success as a young adult. Just like if we go back a little bit, right? We go before adolescence. When you're at school age, this would be, like late elementary school, early middle school. Like, are you competent? Do you have something you're good at? So industry would be like you have things that are your strengths or things that you're good at. And then inferiority would be like, oh, I'm not good at anything at all. So if you go into adolescence and you try and define who you are, but you have this inferiority, you're probably not going to have a very well-defined or a very positive identity. So you're going to struggle here with answering that question, who am I? But if you were successful, you have things you're good at, you feel confident in your abilities, that's going to help you develop a stronger sense of identity and fidelity. So if we look here, and I'm going to edit this just a little bit so you can see it better. If you look here with stage 6, which comes after stage 5, is now intimacy versus isolation. And now your crisis is, who do I belong with? And looking at who should I surround myself with. A lot of times when we think about this, we think about marriage, because that's very much part of this age range. And actually, it's getting a little later now. You're looking at some of the average age of marriage is getting later. So a lot of these age ranges are just ranges. You can change them. Success, would you feel love, but you're also able to show love? So the ability to form meaningful, long lasting relationships. Now, when we talk about intimacy, it doesn't just mean like mushy, significant other relationships. It can just be any kind of meaningful relationship, friendships as well. Failure would then be isolation. So emotional isolation, where you might actually be surrounded by a lot of people, but you don't feel like you fit in with them, or you don't align with them. So that causes emotional isolation. There could be loneliness, where like you're actually lonely, and then depression as well. So as we talked about, if you can't answer the question of who am I, it's very difficult to answer the who do I belong with. And also a big part of this is picking a career, and your career or the specific job you pick is going to really define who you surround yourself with. So that's why if you think about like the midlife crisis, if you've ever heard of that, or maybe you've had parents who have gone through them, midlife crisis is a result of not knowing who they are, and maybe not truly being the person they are. And then as a result, they surround themselves with a bunch of people they don't want to be with. And then they get to the point where they're would be now you get in the middle age, which is like, do you feel productive or do you feel stagnant? And then you have a midlife crisis because you're all like, well, I'm not doing anything with my life. I'm not actually not being the person I want to be. I'm not surrounded by people, blah, blah, blah. And then you have a midlife crisis. So there's your crash course into Erikson. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce your project to you. So begin working on your summative, put in 30, 40 minutes on it. Obviously, it's not due until next week, but still get a good chunk started on it. Maybe get one of the requirements done. And then, like I said, your last focus notes are due by 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday. So your summative, pull it up here. But so your summative is going to be due at the very end of the day on Thursday of next week. And then Friday is going to be our last day of Unit 7. You're going to do an FRQ, summative FRQ. I will say there is some review information on there as well from research methods, but it's open book, just like your AP exam will be, open notes. So it's actually more of like a practice and review activity, along with some terms from developmental psychology. So what you're going to do here is create a developmental biography, or an autobiography if you want to do one on yourself. So what you're going to do is you're going to use developmental psychology theories to analyze the life events of an individual and then analyze the effects of those events on the individual. So you're creating a biography. Biography is the story of someone's life, and going to apply the terminology to that individual. So you will be including events for that individual's life and then using the theories. So things to consider here is what stage of the theory is represented in that event. How is the stage represented in the event? Question mark. And then what long-term impact will that event have on the individual's life? That's especially big with Erikson, as we just talked about. It'll be big with Kohlberg. Those are really the two big ones. Oh, and then parenting styles. So when you do parenting styles, very similar to what you did with your assignment, where you're explaining what's the long-term impact. So what exactly are you making? This is up to you. The final product could be a documentary, a scrapbook, an interview, anything you want it to be. The one thing I will say, who can you make the project about? Literally anyone. You could do characters from books, TV shows, and movies. You could do this on yourself. Because of the coronavirus, we're not doing this in groups. A famous individual, or completely make up a person. What I will say is, don't do it on someone who you don't have permission to do it on. So like if you want to do it on your little brother or little sister or something, like just ask them. But don't do it on like a classmate or something like that. So what you should do today, look at the rubric, determine what you're going to create, and then start brainstorming events that fit with the stages and theories. And then obviously you can use this to follow along. You'll have work time next week in class. So what are you doing here? So apply the parenting styles. You're going to apply 2 parenting styles. So you can give an event about something the parents did to the individual and then explain how that represents one of the parenting styles. And then you would do another event and explain how that would represent another parenting styles. And then once again, the impacts of the parenting styles is addressed, just like you did in your formative assignment. Then you're going to do cognitive development. So you're going to apply all 4 stages of Piaget's stages of development to events or stories. You don't have to talk about a long-term impact with that one because there's not really, but you should include one vocab term relevant to each stage. So once again, this could be, if you think about the toy assignment you did, you could be like, oh, hey, look, this is Jimmy's favorite toy when he was 2, and it's a rattle. And then you talk about why that was his favorite toy according to the stage of development. Kohlberg, we're going to talk about him on Tuesday. You're going to apply 1 stage to an event or story. That'll make more sense after Tuesday, but these terms here are all hyperlinked, so you can go look at the website if you want to get a jump start on moral development. And then for Erikson, you have to apply 4 of Erikson's stages to different events or stories. So if you're thinking about how could you do this with stage 5, as we talked about, that's identity and isolation, you could talk about something they did when they were in high school, how that helped them answer the question of who they are, and then what the long-term impacts on that would be. And then you get 3 points for being creative, putting in effort, and making a quality product. So if you have any questions, let me know. Remember, it is a summative, so put your best effort into it. It's going to be due 11:59 p.m. next week, Thursday. And then on Friday, we'll have kind of our wrap-up day. So once again, just a review, start working on that summative project. Make sure your focus notes get turned in by the end of the day, Tuesday. Have a great weekend. Enjoy it. If you are going to see some family, enjoy that. Make the most out of it. Maybe you're just going to do some virtual family stuff. Have a good one.